Introduce our next speaker. Rodney Shakespeare is visiting professor of binary economics at Trisakti University in Jakarta. He is a Cambridge MA barrister of the Middle Temple, broadcaster with Press TV, and co-founder of the Global Justice Movement. He's going to talk on binary economics, the massive burden imposed by interest, and how this hidden cost of interest can be eliminated. Rodney Shakespeare.
Members of conference, Spirit of Light, Ellen Brown, and I take the opportunity to thank Mark for doing something which eased my entry into the USA. We're in Philadelphia, where in 1776 the USA embarked upon a course of history which was resulting in it giving a lead to the world. But something has gone wrong. America is losing its economic dominance. It's probably losing its political dominance, and without the slightest doubt, it has lost its moral authority. And of the many issues and statistics which people here could produce as evidence of this, I am going to give you one, which is about 3 weeks ago, the Homeland Security Agency, which is not the Pentagon, announced that it was buying 450 million dum-dum bullets. And Stephen, a dum-dum bullet, as you know, goes straight the way through you. Sorry, an ordinary bullet goes straight the way through you, but the dum-dum bullet suddenly expands and makes a hole the size of a baseball or even the size of a small football. Such things are banned by international law. What is more, there's another 250 million dum-dum bullets being bought by your Homeland Security Agency. And the way to think of this is to think of the war in Iraq in 2004, and then think of 7 years of that. And that is what is in store for the United States of America. 7 years of war with dum-dum bullets aimed at the civilian population. Now, when did things go wrong? Well, they actually started to go wrong in 1776. But I say to you, Ethan Allen, as a Limey, that it was not that you got your independence. That was right and was necessary. What went wrong was that the USA did not create a democracy. It only created, at best, a half democracy. And to understand that, you have to go back 90 years before 1776 to John Locke, who stated that the essence of the matter was life, liberty, and property. And then he added two extra things to that. By property, he essentially meant usually land, but something which provided an income. And he said, first of all, that your property must not be so large that it prevents me from having property. And then secondly, he went to another aspect of it, which was that my property must not be so large that I cannot consume all the income. Now, in setting that out, he was in fact making, as was well indicated by Mark in his speech, basically setting out the principles of a balanced free market, private property economy in which everyone can be involved. But what happened was, although in Virginia, the USA in its considerations was going for life, liberty, and property, when the considerations came to Philadelphia, it changed to life, liberty, and happiness. And I'm not expert in this, but I believe that even was it Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were some of those who got it changed to happiness. So you see something specific of huge importance, income, really, the real economy, which was then agriculture, that had been eliminated, and instead you had a vacuous, abstract noun, because that exactly is what happiness is. And right at the heart, at the start of your republic then, there was a fundamental flaw. Now, one of our speakers, Mark, in an article which you wrote, which I found on the internet, you put it exactly. You said, we cannot have a politically democratic society and without economic democracy. And if I may say so, Mark, that was the thrust of what you were saying this afternoon. As to how we get that economic democracy, well, this conference is quite exceptional in the stand of the audience, in the knowledge and the sharpness by which you address the issues. And so most of this is, I mean, you know it all. You know that the banking system creates 95 or more %. You know that it adds an administration cost, it adds interest, and it does not put it into the real economy. And an aspect which was not really developed in some of the speeches. It does not put it into the spreading of the real economy, so that we end up, as John Locke understood, with productive capacity in the hands of every single individual. And later on, if I get time, I shall show that, in fact, that even includes little children. So it's important, then, that we should understand that the thrust of the situation upon which we must all rally has to be, at the end of the day, the lending of money. You can go for debt-free issuance, but as Tom Hagen, I can't see where Tom's got to, was pointing out, you have to be clear, and you must not put forward things which in any way enable the other side to get a grip on you. You're up against opposition all the time. Keep it simple and take the most defensible positions. Everybody here is a revolutionary, but limit your revolution to what can be understood by ordinary human beings in the battles in which you have to fight. A quick word on interest. Interest has been dealt with. People were quoting Marguerite Kennedy, who says that 80% of the population lose from interest, 10% balance, 10% a gain. And she's responsible for the analysis which says 40% of any price for a goods or service is in fact interest. But there's a bigger and much more important matter to do with interest, which has not been dealt with by Marguerite Kennedy. It is this, that interest, by its very nature, is a drag, a complete and absolute drag on the operations of a true free market economy involving everybody. And it is that drag, meaning essentially that if I produce, I'm not able to spend my production. And it is that drag which, more than anything else, puts the case against interest. To whom should the money be lent? And let's address this issue. Well, the answer is to any part of the real economy where the real economy is going to be spread. Now, here we get to a big problem, which is not really understood in monetary reform circles. As to what produces the wealth, our mindset is still conditioned by Adam Smith, who opened his book in 1776 by saying that human labor produces it all. Adam Smith was doing his thinking in the years prior to 1776. And he had his pin factory, which is essentially, it was all about human specialization, with the scissors, with the file, and then, was it kneeling it in the cayenne, is it, when you put it in the fire and harden it. All hand operations. He did have intimations that something different was happening. But he said it was all labor. And the right wing in economics has since upheld that, because it wishes to hide the value of the productive assets and the capital instruments. And the left wing has upheld it as the labor theory of value, because that is the case by which they push for the redistribution of wealth to the mass of working people. But the reality is that from 1776 onward, if not a bit before, in any task an increasing percentage of the production was being done by the capital instruments. Now, believe it or not, this was first identified in 1803 by Jean-Baptiste Say. Now, Say, you read the encyclopedias, is described as a disciple of Adam Smith. Well, yes, except that Say actually realized that Smith had got it wrong. Now, there's Mark with political democracy. There's the fractional reserve system, putting the money out and not putting it into the purposes of the economy. Public banking must get the money out to everybody, interest free. There's interest and the effects of interest, and it operates as a drag on the economy. We don't need that. Here's Jean-Baptiste Say, and I apologize for a long piece of text. But here is the crux of the matter. What he said was, Smith had got it completely wrong, and the whole of his thinking is wrong. And yet he's described, Say is described as a disciple of Smith. But he says, and where we got it, sorry, here we are. He attributed a gigantic influence to the division of labour. Smith's ignorance precluded him from establishing a true theory of machinery in relation to production of wealth. And what Say was saying was, in the production, the machinery was doing more and more on a higher percentage. Now, that was true in 1803. And what it means is this, that unless what produces the wealth, namely the capital instruments and its ownership, is distributed right the way throughout the whole of the population, there cannot be a true free market which operates in which producers and consumers are the same people. And for those who know about what's called Say's law, forget it. It is a lie, and it is corruption put up by a corrupt economics. It is Say's theorem. And what Say said was, unless producers and consumers are the same people, and therefore unless the capital instruments and the ownership is right the way throughout all the individuals in the population, then there cannot be a true free market in balance in which producers and consumers are the same people. And that is an aspect of reform which is not normally dealt with in monetary reform circles. Now, there's Say's theorem, producers and consumers must be the same people, and it is not a law. It is, in fact, a theorem. It's a self-evident identity which ought to be true, which ought to be implemented, but which is not implemented anywhere in a practice. The way forward, therefore, comprises this: an understanding of who or what creates the wealth, and that is not normally dealt with in monetary reform. A productive power must be widely spread, and that is also something which people sort of have an instinct in monetary reform, but don't really understand the reason why. And lastly, the society, and here we go for, say, Tom Greco mentioning the commons. The key part of the commons, more than anything else, is in fact society's money supply, which must be used for everybody and not just for the purposes of a small clique. I'm now going to go straight at the areas of which you can do this and development of the real economy to everybody. And I want to say this: I was delighted to hear amongst our speakers a call to go beyond just, say, a state bank, but for something for America, on the scale of something for America. And I want to say that there is now an opportunity for you to develop something for the whole world. Right out there, even though America has lost its moral authority, deep down inside people's hearts, there is still a desire for America to provide a solution. That may sound contradictory, but that is indeed the case. Now, number one, and it was mentioned by Mark Pash, housing. You can borrow $200,000 and repay $200,000 under public banking. It should be only 80% of the fair market value. There should be criminal penalties for deliberately false valuations and declarations of interest. The administration cost would be 1% or less. The next one is small businesses and farms. There must be collateral. If there is collateral and a good business plan and a desire to repay, there's no reason why small business should not have interest-free loans. Because the principle is you are trying to spread productive capacity to everybody in the society. And therefore, a small business is automatically eligible for the interest-free loan as long as it fulfills the conditions of collateral, responsibility, and a good business plan. Small is beautiful, keep the financing local. Yes, all of this, of course, does keep the benefits local and does not allow them to go off to Wall Street. Now, this one really is the big one on a huge scale. Roads, sewage works, waterworks. There's a lovely waterworks in Philadelphia. And I'm just going to tell one quick story which illustrates the importance of public banking and public capital projects. This is just one example, and they're all like this. In the UK, in 1976, we wanted to build a bridge, and it was costed at £28 million. Well, of course, that was an underestimate, and they had to double the price for what, the actual cost. In no time at all, interest and compounding interest had put the figure up to 64 million, and by 1992 it was up to 439 million, and wait for it, all the time the bridge makes a profit on its maintenance, which you must have, and on its staff to collect the money and all those things. It makes a huge profit. But when it got to 439, the government had to intervene, because this was then a cost on the, you call it property tax, we call it rates or council tax. It was in fact a cost on the local ratepayers or property tax payers of the area concerned. That is the thing which, well, it goes on all the time, and it's just typical of any large capital project. As regards environmental capital things, do go wide and think about the world. I mean, I could go a lot on about Bangladesh, but there is a need, for example, in Bangladesh, for sea barrages. These are great shingle constructions with mangrove, that's the tree, cresting them. They simply will not be built. And if you knew the research director and the governor of the National Bank of Bangladesh, they've been trained in American universities, and they're not going to think at all. They don't care a damn. They're controlled by the Western mindset and the Western financial system. Bangladesh will never get its sea barrages. As for sewage systems, every day in this world, 25,000 people die from the effects of dirty water. And that's an absolute disgrace, and it's right the way around the world. And I mean, go to Indonesia, where I go a lot, and there are areas there where they sort of take me in and guard me. And the Indonesian people are not genuinely violent. But I mean, they see a European, and the tensions can be very, very high. And when you see the sewage and the disease and the rest of it, I mean, it's shocking and it's disgusting. But then Indonesia is another country, all of whose thinking is controlled by the West, and they've no concept yet, we're working on it, of using their own national bank for their sewage systems. Moving on, clean electricity generation. Well, it's a big subject, but here's just one example. In the UK, we have a simple project, nothing fancy. It just consists of concrete and turbines and Mother Nature, which in the Severn Estuary, that's the great sort of river on the west of England, coming in and narrowing, with a 14-foot, that's about from here up to the word library, I should say, probably it's about 14-foot, tidal, up and down twice a day. And this would generate 10% of the UK's electricity supply. But when the new government came in, it immediately cancelled, because you see, borrowing the money at interest from the banking system, immediately the whole thing is unrepayable in no time at all, just as the Humber Bridge was. And yet with interest-free money, you would have a supply of free, clean energy forevermore, with absolutely minimum maintenance costs. And the UK has a whole lot of sites, particularly there are tidal races underneath the sea in areas around the UK. So, but all that's not, just simply not going to be done. I was particularly delighted to hear a sentence coming from Paul. The surname has escaped me, but the Canadian Defence Minister who spoke yesterday. Yes. He did a throwaway line. And as a former Defence Minister, one can well imagine that whatever he says publicly and whatever he knows privately, you know, he has to keep his big mouth shut. What I am going to say this is that there is now a whole area of new alternative technologies which are already at this stage, preliminary stage or advanced stage of development. You can find them, solar electricity from the deserts. You can find them at this site here. And you, sir, yes, you and I were, indeed, you and I were discussing this, and this is the site. You have to sort of Google on This Week in New Energy. You'll then get This Week in Free Energy, and then you get this site. But here is the source of all the information and the new technologies. And they deal with everything, the fraud, the conning, the self-delusions, and the realities and the state of play. And Paul may have been referring to something like a plasma engine, now an advanced state of technology, which could be used in aeroplanes, and which would in fact be a clean engine, which was the point that he was actually making. It would in fact be a propeller-driven aeroplane, but such things are already feasible. As student loans, we had Samuel Giles raising the subject, dealing with university banks, and let there be all sorts of public banks dealing with these particular matters. I mean, Ellen was telling us on a trillion, was it, that you were saying? It is now the sum. The whole thing is totally out of control, and the thing is an outrage. But it's all part of putting the whole of society into debt forevermore. I mean, they got Greece completely screwed. You've got debt peons, debt serfs, not just for the existing people, but for their children and for their grandchildren. And what is really happening throughout the world is that a system is now developing in which everybody is being put into debt forevermore. And in the UK, they've got all the students simply just almost apathetically accepting that they're going to be in debt for the rest of their lives. It's not necessary. Now, microcredit, well, every 30 minutes, an Indian farmer commits suicide in a very, very painful way. In India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, out in the rural sticks, the moneylenders can charge 100%, 150 or 200. One of the features of those three countries is that the poor people, as a sort of group, are utterly honourable in the repayment of debt. It's absolutely astonishing. And if they can't repay, up comes the herbicide, or they sell one of their kidneys. Now, commercial banking has come in on the act. Oh, look, this is wonderful. We can batten in on the poor, and by golly, you can. And they are charging 50 to 60%. The great microcredit organisations, and one thinks of Grameen, and one which I've been dealing with, I won't go into it, they charge roughly 34%, of which 17 is for the money that they have to borrow, and 17 is for the very, very expensive administration costs. Because you see, it's not like here. There, when they make a loan, the person is discreetly selected and the person is trained. And then there's a complicated business of collecting small amounts every week. All highly expensive, it costs 17%. Now, when people have raised, as I have raised, with the Bangladesh National Bank, you know, why don't you, in fact, have an interest-free supply and give it to Grameen Bank, give it to the one I know, IIRD, which is a huge organisation, and then they can do the lending at what is the administration and training cost of 17%. And the answer is no. This would be inflationary. This would be, and all the arguments which you've touched on today. The National Bank of Bangladesh is in the hands of the Western financial system. So there you are. That's something which could be done, and you would get 98% repayment. In microcredit, when it's done properly, they get 98% repayment. Highly significantly, they get these figures when the bulk of the loans, in fact, goes to the women. And you have to then know how they organize the women in such a way, and the way the psychology works, etc. But it's quite extraordinary, 98% repayment. Now, here I have a problem, because binary economics is where I come from. And now, who was it? It was Gar Alphavets, wasn't it? Who was mentioned ESOPs. That's the employee stock ownership plan. That is actually the creation of binary economics. Except that the ESOP, the binary ESOP, is a part of new paradigm thinking. And when it got to be implemented in the USA in 1972, 3, 4, 5, it was in fact implemented for the purposes of the existing paradigm. That is to say, a flawed, corrupt, and deceitful structures were implemented, which did not use the interest-free money supply, which did not have the intent of spreading ownership widely throughout the society, and in any case did not insist upon the full payout of earnings. Now, it's a bit technical, I can't go into it. It is certainly true that the evidence is that employee stock ownership plans, as they are, does in fact lead to increased productiveness in the particular corporations. But then the assets of the trusts in some of the plans can be used and can be ripped off by the management. In other trusts, in other stock plans, the management benefits totally unduly. We're not at all satisfied with them. But the point I'm going to make is this, is there is a trust mechanism within the ESOP. And that trust mechanism can in fact be used in a particular way, using interest-free money, and you can then involve any individual in the population in the ownership of a major corporation. You in fact force the corporations to use the mechanism, but you stop the concentration of the ownership of the capacity in the existing shareholders. And people should not object to this, because it is the point which was being made, I think it was by Mark Pash, that ultimately, and certainly by Henry Ford, that you've got to get the consuming capacity. You must get productive capacity out in the population, and then you get the consuming capacity out in the population, then you can get the supply and demand, and incidentally, you get social and economic justice. And you get democracy, because you see, the key part of democracy is not the power to periodically put a cross on a piece of paper. Everyday power only comes from control over your own life. And that means that you should have at least some form of independent income. I won't go on with binary economics anymore. I do say, well, you might have a look at that. Very many interesting things there. One of them is something which I only recently completed about 3 years ago, and it took me about 40 years to do it. But in fact, there are 53 false assumptions of mainstream economics. Most people, like Steve Keen, he finds about 8 or 9. And the monetary something reformers, who mentioned, I can't quite find it, they can find about 8 or 9. But there are 53 on that site. And if you reverse those, reverse every one, you'll get something very, very similar, almost the same, as the public banking as being developed by this conference. The last point, I think, the 2 other points, is the elimination of the national debt. Yes, you could do some remarkable things. Ellen was we're touching on this. And my own feeling would be is that you should do it gradually. But you would be borrowing for your purposes interest-free, and you would have the long-term aim of eliminating the national debt. Now, sustainability and population limitation. Here again, this was touched upon, and I can't quite remember who it was. It is a fact a straight fact demonstrated in country after country that a population will voluntarily stabilize. I'm not going into why it voluntarily stabilizes or the detail of it. You may say it's contraception, you may say it's abortion, you may just say whatever you like. But if all people in the income, if all of them, or a large proportion, have a stable income, and there's education, health, water, and sewage, and there is a degree of status for women. I did not say complete status. The evidence is that when there's a degree of status for women, then you really start to get this population stabilization. And in countries like Europe and Japan, there the population is being kept up largely by the results of immigration. But the sort of the host population, whatever phrase you use, are in fact stabilizing and reducing. There is another aspect to this, which is that once everybody has a sufficient basic income, and that will come very largely from the binary economic aspects of this. I use that phrase because it's the technicalities, but it's all public banking and the uses of the interest-free loan supply, is that when everybody has the same type of income and a secure status, then you can start to argue, think, where does insecurity come from? Why are people always wanting to keep up with the Jones? Why are they greedy? And I would like to suggest to you that the reasons why they're greedy is partly it is from an insecurity deep down inside them, or a perception of insecurity. However you look at it, you have to address the subject is, are humans ineluctably, uncontrollably selfish? Or is it that we could create the circumstances where we could at least be persuaded to change? And if you can't be persuaded, once everybody's being treated reasonably the same, then you could, in fact, just say, well, you aren't going to do it, because at least the others won't be really getting away. I'm not proposing everybody being equal, but I am saying you aren't going to control these problems of overconsumption until at such time as you have that secure income for everybody in the society, and that includes a baby. I am completely radical on this. I say all babies must earn their own way sufficiently for their food, their warmth, and their nappies. And they can only do that if they are associated with capital ownership from the day they are born. It need only be a small amount of the income, though the binary economics actually pays out the shares for about 10 or 11 times existing earnings, the way it works. I won't go into that. And 5, a little bit more. You could, if you like, then at the age of 11 give sufficient to pay for education. I think education should be, well, I won't go into that. But certainly at the age of 16, such income as is with the child stays with the child. Because you see, there has to be the principle that everybody is connected with the productive capacity in some way, or you don't have a proper free market economy. All right, if I just now move quickly now through to the end, an aspect which has been touched on by some speakers, the existing commercial banking system has completely betrayed us. It survives because it says we are the center of this wonderful free market society, which is efficient, all of whose outcomes are just. It is a complete, absolute lie. But because no one can succeed in challenging that, you have a problem at the moment in fact, getting a grip on them and saying, you've got to be controlled because you've abused the thing and you don't even understand true free market principles. And the way to do it is a gradual rise to 100% banking reserves, which has been touched on by our speakers. Nothing new. Simmons, Fisher, even Milton Friedman have understood this thing. And then you just say to the banks, well, all right, if you want to lend money, you'll lend your own money. The whole public thinks that you lend your own money. You don't, but you can get on and lend your own money. And you can lend the... And you can lend the deposits of your customers with permission. If they want, in fact, to have an income, okay, and You can have this account, and this account with varying degrees of risk and reward. Okay, here we come then, and there we are. Up here, sorry, okay, up there is your national bank. Here is your state bank, or your town bank, or your city bank, or your university bank, or Mark Pash, wherever you are, I can't see you now, the variations. Any bank which can, in fact, use its credit creation powers for going into the real economy and spreading it. Over here is something which I won't go into. I really can't touch on the subject of Islam today, but there is another source of money in Islam, and it consists, in fact, of, you can see the word zakah. Can you see that word there, zakah? Zakah is one of the 5 pillars in Islam, and it is, in fact, an obligation of the rich to provide essentially a wealth tax for the benefit of charity of the poor. There is no concept of eliminating poverty, only of alleviating poverty. And so don't have any illusions that there are great new ideas coming out in Islam. On the other hand, there are plenty of modern thinkers in Islam who say, well, you know, the bottom line here is we must get modern, and zakah must be used for a Islamic, modern, democratic, private property, free market for everybody economy. They do understand it, but they're caught by an inertia because zakah, as traditionally construed, is part of the Islamic faith. There are also, and here again, I can't find the names, but spare funds in the Ummah, particularly in Islam, there are sources of funds which could well be used for interest-free lending in which there might be a small loss, and doing it purely for the benefit and for the satisfaction of serving the Ummah. Those funds are available. The state-backed public bank or the banks can directly lend, but here are all the purposes. Here's the Grameen Bank, small business, microfinance, motor, chickens, fish pond, public capital, bridges, schools, hospitals, roads, sewage, repay the national debt, solar electricity, developed, touched on several speakers, tidal barrages, I'm doing that one, free energy generation. I don't like wind farms, they're really not very efficient. Solar has huge potential. I mean, there's already a proposal for solar farms in, is it Algeria or Libya, which would provide a vast amount of electricity for Europe. Homes there, we've touched on homes, farms over here, student loans, and the big one here, medium and large business. The large corporations would have to pay out their earnings all the time. And therefore, when they wish to expand, they would have to take the option of interest-free loans, and they would get that as long as they expanded the ownership. Now, I'm going to stop there. Bob, am I well within time at the moment? Just in which case I'll take one other issue, which is gold. We won't go into, two issues. This and public banking is counter-inflationary. All the people who've looked at this, they all say that there's an efficient creation. Eventually, there will be a relative decline in prices. And that is why I, Ellen, with Peter Challen, am co-author of a book which points out that in the counter-inflationary circumstances, you can actually have a debt-free issuance for a degree of basic income. The other issue, though, which comes up, particularly in Islam, where you have these great lobbies for gold. I mean, Ellen will be speaking at a conference next November in Kuala Lumpur, and there, the true thrust of that conference, which you may not be aware, Ellen, is gold coming from Camille Amira. But gold doesn't get rid of interest, and Camille Amira has no genuine interest in spreading the real economy. Gold backing is another matter entirely. If you do this, you do not need to link the money creation to commodities or to gold. But when you're talking in the real world out there, they all get, as was accepted by Mark when he was speaking, you get lots of people, particularly on the right wing, panicking that you are creating money and it's going to be inflationary. And linking to gold does not stop you using your money supply. And it depends what the linkage is. And all the time, of course, this money is being repaid. So you can, in fact, use gold backing if you have to go into that particular argument. But you don't need to. This is totally linking everything to the real economy. I stop there. Now, and if you could just stay behind me. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great graphic. I love it. So after listening all day, yesterday and today, my one question is, and if New Jersey, who's billions of dollars in debt, they created a state bank, could they create that debt, their own payment, pay off the debt, then they would own their and then that the state bank would now have the debt of New Jersey. Could they do that at 0% interest?
I think you're asking is that you're saying could existing debt
yeah.
be taken over?
Yeah.
I think the answer, Ellen, is bit by bit. That is the end of my answer. Yes, Ellen.
Yes, they certainly could refinance the debt, and they could refinance it at 0% interest. I mean, I know California debt. We have I think it's 155 billion in outstanding bonds, and 70% of that is interest.
Yes.
So
yes.
You could easily generate that much credit through a Bank of California because we have a huge potential capital base and a huge potential revenue base, and just use that credit to buy up the debt. You could do that in theory. The only thing is the rating, and and then refinance it at 0% interest. Or you could do it at 5% interest, but you get the interest back, so it's still free. Yeah.
So we're paying ourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So you could get rid of the interest by running it through your own bank. The only problem might be that the rating agencies might not like it. Now, of course, you don't. Then the only reason you care about ratings is you need liquidity like any other bank. In other words, you have to be able to borrow from the Fed funds in order to pay your deposits, et cetera. So if the rating agencies disapprove of doing it that way, you can do it in a more roundabout way, but you can come to the same result. For example, you could buy municipal bonds if you're allowed to do that, and then the interest that you make on the municipal bonds you could use to pay off your interest on your state debt. And if they don't allow you to do that, just go into regular banking, and the profit you make on banking, use that to pay the interest on your debt.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Emily Payton. I was going along quite well with what you were saying until you got to a certain point in your presentation where you said that we have to afford some degree of status to women, but we don't really have to afford full degree of status. At that point I said, where do you presume the authority to suggest that we shouldn't have full or total status, and if not more than men, considering what we have here? So I'd like you to answer why you said that.
She was asking, she thought she followed everything until you said something about...
You're referring to the situation of women. I can't involve myself in issues of what is meant by equal treatment. All I'm saying is that even when there's not equal treatment, you still are getting that. It is a straight fact that you're still getting the balancing in society. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be equal treatment, I'm just saying it's a straight fact. What you have to do is to achieve a reasonable standard of living, clean water, clean sewage, education, and you must work on the question of the relationships between men and women. And when you do that, it is a fact that the population starts to balance.
Right, but we haven't dealt with the fact that we haven't valued the woman's nurturing and the fact that we need
haven't
to
valued
nurture
the woman's nurture.
Oh, look. Ma'am, I have to move very, very quickly, but all the time my language was that every person in the economy, and by that, and I actually went, for my example, to shock you a bit, I went to the child, but that involves a woman who's doing the jobs of caring for the children, for whatever the circumstances are. In what is proposed, everybody has some form of independent income, whereas at the moment, a woman does not get that. She's either dependent on somebody else or it comes through redistribution. And what's being proposed here is that she actually gets it from her own earning, which will come from her connection with the productive economy. But I do think that is absolutely vital if you're to get a truly balanced free market economy. If I may say so, I don't think I had time to develop.
I took something a little different from what you said than what Emily did. I understood you to say, not that you weren't interested in women having complete equality, but that once women started to be given equality, then you could see the things starting to happen. You could have said, and if they get to full equality, something else will happen. But I didn't take that to be that you were saying that women shouldn't have full equality, just that you have to start or that will never happen.
Bob, I'll do it very quickly. Right at the beginning, I took Mark Patch's point, which you don't have a political democracy without an economic democracy. And in respect of questions of equality and etc., you start with the economics, and then you will then get these other consequences.
Last question right here.
Tim Havel, Boston.
Please put the microphone.
Okay, Tim Havel, Boston. One thing which was missing from your talk, although you did mention a quote from Schumacher at one brief point, is Schumacher's principal insight, which is an economic system that is sustainable needs to value ecosystem services, and I would also go so far as to say it values what we heard about at the beginning of this morning, which it also has to value the love economy as well. So right now you're sort of putting it in as a Band-Aid mediated by politics. I would suggest that it needs to come in at a somewhat more fundamental level if the economy is truly to be sustainable.
Okay, well, I didn't hear that, but I think it was Schumacher. I couldn't touch on, I mean, I wanted to touch on Mondragon in Spain, and the variation, because the question of cooperatives and the different structures. I did not touch on Schumacher. I did not touch on distributism, which is associated with Schumacher. But I did touch on small business and small farms, and those concepts are right in this, and they are right in Schumacher, and they are right at the center of distributism.
Thank you so much.